How big is the topic of the Russia-Ukraine war for ordinary Americans? Do people talk about it, or nobody really cares?
Boy, asking me to comment on.
I can weigh in on this. You want to think about that while I give my take on it?
Sure, Jeff.
Well, I'm a former comedian, and still have a lot of friends who are comedians. And I notice, like on Facebook, whenever any one of them does the stupidest little thing, they're all very supportive and interested. Oh, I got new headshots. I'm going to be playing at Ho-Ho's, whatever it is. And it's going to sound like, oh, I'm just crying because I'm not getting attention. That's not it at all. It's a reflection on them. None of them ever pay any attention to what I post about the stuff I do with you. Also, none of my relatives ever do. Nobody on my Facebook page, hardly at all, except new people I got through working with you, pay any attention to it. And it's just the way it is. That I think is actually a window into how it is. That's why I'm saying it. Because usually people, kind of fake that they're interested just to be nice. They don't even do that. They are just so not interested. Yeah. And that's the sad truth.
Yeah, look, I'm gonna Jeff, and this. We came together during the Iraq War in the lead up, and it's the same thing. You have small communities of activist-minded people who were engaged on the issue of Iraq, but the general audience, the general population, just didn't care. I mean,
but then there's a big difference. Then it was because Americans were fighting in that situation. So that it's
right.
understandable. So there's going to be less interest now because there's not Americans.
Well, that's the whole point. Is now there's even less reason to be engaged because, man, when we're talking about wasteful money, we have no money. I mean, Americans don't care. When you say $100 billion, they're like, oh, yeah. Okay, because the budgets become too crazy. The numbers mean nothing, and it has no direct impact on them. Again, I've used this in respect to Iraq, but I'll say the same thing. If I were to go out and just let's say have a lunch or with 50 random Americans who were willing to sit down and talk honestly about this. What I would get from them, let's say 50 men my age with similar backgrounds, military backgrounds, played sports, etc. First of all, they'd all sit there and they'd go, well, yeah, we care about it, but we don't know much about it. So we're sort of prisoner to what we get off of TV. So right off the bat, we understand that these are people who have a job. They work long hours and they're probably good at their job, which means they're focused on the specifics of their job. The last thing they're thinking about during the day is what's going on in Ukraine or with Russia. They come home, they're probably of an age where they are married, they have children, and they come home and they have family issues. And I don't mean that bad. I mean, they're dealing with their family. And now maybe at some point in time, once you put the kids down and all that, if you don't want to watch a Netflix movie, you scroll through the news. And you get fed whatever the mainstream media gives you in that 15 to 20 minutes, which you've dedicated to seeing the news. And then you're off to bed or whatever. So they'll say, that's it. We don't have time, they'll say. And I've heard this all before. We don't have time to put into the studying the topic like you. Scott, it's a full-time job for you. They're damn right it is. I mean, I wake up in the morning, and from the time I wake up until I go out, time to go to bed, this is all I do. It's a full-time job. I read, I write, I watch, I listen, I think. Ukraine and Russia. And it's complicated. Even after doing all that, I still don't get it 100% right. That shows you how complicated it is. Right. It's a very complicated issue. And so I excuse them. I say, okay, I get that. But now I'll take those same 50 people and I'll take them to Monday Night Football or we'll watch a Sunday game. And we're going to turn on the game, and they're just going to be all into it, man. They got the stats of everybody. Boom, 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 boom. Or if they're baseball fans, we'll go watch a baseball game. And they got the batting statistics, the stolen base statistics. They know it all. And I don't know any of that. And I say, how the hell do you guys know all this? Well, we read the sports page. I say, you don't read the sports page. You study the sports page. Right. I bet at lunchtime at work, you're going through that. I bet you run a fantasy football league where you've got everything down. You want to know why you know all that? Because that's the priority in your life. That's because you have decided that running a fantasy football league and knowing these sports statistics is important to you. And I'm not belittling that, but Ukraine isn't important to you. And that's why the vast majority of Americans don't care about it, because it doesn't impact their daily lives. What they know about it is superficial. And it's not just superficial, it's been deliberately distorted into some sort of black and white issue, so that what they're seeing on TV automatically portrays Russia as bad. So that's pre-programmed into them.
Right.
So that when I come out and I say something like, hey, Russia's on the right side of history, they're, what little they got going in their brain about this issue says, wrong, wrong, wrong. That's not what I heard. And that's why it's very difficult to
it's out and out brainwashing. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Is NATO, as opposed to NAFO, NATO and the U.S. being strategic, getting rid of all their outdated, diverse equipment to Ukraine so as to make an easy case to taxpayers to fund all new weapons, making them consistent across the NATO force?
Here's the way I'm going to answer it. First of all, the answer is no, that they're not being strategic. Anytime you come up with something that's too clever by far, too clever by half, I think is the term that's used.
Yes.
Remember
what that means, though. Do you know what that means?
That the people that are doing this are fundamentally incompetent people, and they're not that clever. This will require a level of coordination, a level of insight, a level of maturity, a level of patience that doesn't exist in NATO. First of all, they're not getting rid of all their outdated, diverse equipment. If they were, they've already gotten rid of it. There's internal debates going on right now about, are we going to give them a Leopard 2? Yeah, we'll give them 12. That's not enough. Give them 13. Are we going to give them a Challenger 2 tank? If this was the coordinated strategy you're saying, they'd already be giving this stuff out. NATO is a confused mess. And the tragedy is their confusion will lead to more Ukrainian deaths, is leading to more Ukrainian deaths. And again, that's my comeback to all you allegedly pro-Ukrainian people out there. You're literally killing the people you claim to be defending by supporting these policies, by supporting a dysfunctional NATO, by supporting an insane United States. I mean, my God, by sitting there here, ready for this one, Jeff?
Yes, I'm ready.
It's one of the best ones of the night. I was put on the Center for Countering Disinformation's hit list. No, they don't call it a hit list, blacklist. I was blacklisted. I'm an information terrorist. I am a war criminal. And the number one complaint they had against me, was that I dared say that Ukraine is a proxy of NATO, that this is a proxy conflict. And yet, the Ukrainian Minister of Defense just came out yesterday bragging. We are a proxy army for NATO. We are dying for NATO. It is our blood, not theirs. They must give us equipment for this. I look forward to him being right next to me on this list, because I've been saying that since day one, because it's the truth. But finally, he had to say it because you can't pretend otherwise. So it's amazing. Anyways.
I've heard murmurs on Telegram channels about Ukraine using chemical weapons in Soledar and Bakhmut. What do you know about this, Scott? I feel, if true, this isn't an issue that should be swept under the carpet.
Well, there's a video out there that shows Ukrainians preparing what appears to be hydrogen cyanide type chemical to be delivered using drones. And so they have a whole room full of drones, these little commercial drones that you can buy, and they're setting them up so that they can be used kamikaze-like to dive in and spread hydrogen cyanide, which would, of course, be chemical weapons and would be prohibited by law. Let me put it this way. If a video emerged that showed Syrian government soldiers sitting there lecturing us, bragging about what they're doing, opening up a refrigerator with things like that, man, we would have OPCW teams swarming into Syria, surrounding them, drowning them with inspectors. Now we have the Ukrainians, what appears to be Ukrainians, doing this, and not a peep from anyone. There's been some talk that this isn't just some sort of propaganda or threat, that they've been talking about some Wagner soldiers in Bakhmut getting irritated, throat irritations and lung irritations from breathing in. That could be anything. I mean, you get in the combat, there's cordite, there's dust in the air. When high explosives go off, it mixes in with the dust. You're just breathing the world's worst crap into your lungs. And, if it's phosphorus containers, then or phosphine. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could be something. If I'm not there to test it, I don't know. But the point is, somebody should be challenging Ukraine on this. Find out who these people are who made the video. They're identifiable. And then to question, is this just stupid propaganda? If it is, then the Ukrainian government needs to shut it down and say, we don't do chemical weapons. That's not what we do. But there's not a peep out of Ukraine. There's not a peep out of NATO. There's not a peep out of the West. There's not a peep out of the OPCW. I mean, again, they got this vaunted intelligence staff that sat there and watched news reports out of Syria and went, we must get involved. Hey, OPCW, there's a damn video showing Ukrainians preparing something, phosgene, or hydrogen cyanide for delivery against Russian troops, a violation of the chemical weapons treaty. What are you doing about it? Where's your inspection team? Where's your demand for entry? Where's your demand for cooperation? Where's your statement that if you don't cooperate, we're going to turn to the Security Council and ask for a military strike? Silence.
Any chance one of Scott's public talks would focus entirely on the history of Nazis in Ukraine? That's an interesting idea. I think a lot of people with blue and yellow flags in their Twitter bio don't understand that part of history and might be more willing to listen to Scott's analysis of the war if they knew that, instead of just listening to the media saying there is no Nazi problem in Ukraine.
I'm not opposed to this. The problem is this. When we speak of Bandera, who is the Stepan Bandera, who's sort of the founder of the modern ultranationalist movement, and he's definitely the spiritual core for Ukrainian nationalists today, people will automatically say he had no other choice, that he had to do bad things in support of Ukrainian nationalism, that his motivations were just, but his means were harsh. And as soon as they say that, it becomes difficult now to move forward, because they've just literally accepted as something not to be condemned, mass murder, the murder of Jews, tens of thousands, 110,000 Poles in the Volyn campaign, 200,000 Russians in a decade of fighting from 1944 until 1953. And how do you begin to break that down? So then you again talk about how they worked with the Nazis and cooperated with the Nazis, and they say, yes, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and their real enemy was the Soviet Union. Stalin was the real enemy. They just do all this deflection. So I don't think that there's a lot of ignorance. I mean, yes, in America, a lot of ignorance, and a lot of people wearing the little, what do they call that? Virtue signaling. Look at me, I've got my Ukrainian flag on. I'm a good person. Yes, they don't know the truth, but the hardcore people, no, I've already had conversations with them and some people that I respect, and their whole thing is, Bandera, brought to life Ukrainian nationalism during very difficult times, and that if you're going to take on Adolf Hitler and Stalin at the same time, you have to, it's going to be a tough thing. It's a tough fight. Casualties were made. And so they've excused away, his link with Nazi Germany, his anti-Semitism, and the fact that he has said in order to get the Ukrainian nation, millions of people might have to be killed in the process.
As the Ukrainians get better at retreating, what would happen if the Russians pushed the Ukrainian forces all the way to their western borders? How would NATO react?
Well, we're going to find out. I think tomorrow Putin's giving a big speech, and something tells me that the speech might be linked to maybe the next phase in the conflict, which means the green flare is going to go up, and the Russian forces are going to start meaningful offensive operations. And then we'll find out how good the Ukrainians are at retreating. They're not very good right now because they tend to die. And I think the Russians are going to hit the accelerator and just press them. And, one concept that comes to mind is collapse. So we'll see whether the Russians take it all the way to the Western Ukrainian border, or, to the border between Western Ukraine and Poland and Hungary and Romania and all. I don't know. They have X number of troops. Ukraine's a big country, and they don't want to make the same mistake of, spreading out too far. So we'll see what the Russians do, though. But I have a funny feeling the Russians have thought through what the next steps are, and the next steps are designed to be decisive in nature. Russia doesn't want this war to go on forever. Russia doesn't want this war to end with this cancerous, odious, infected state called Zelensky's Ukraine still intact. I think Russia's looking for a decisive end to this conflict, and NATO's going to have to accept it. The bottom line is NATO can do nothing, and it can provide weapons. I mean, wow, the British are providing 14 Challenger 2 tanks. 14, Jeff. 14. That's a lot. It's not really a lot. The Zaluzhny asked for 300, and the British gave him 14. Good job, England. But that's it. Peskov said no statement. Okay, well, now we don't. So maybe tomorrow's something different. But the bottom line is at some point in time, the Russians are going to pull the trigger. And when they do, I think they're not going to keep their foot off the gas. It's just going to keep the pressure going and going and going and going. So, we'll see. But NATO, all NATO can do is continue to bankrupt itself financially and militarily by providing equipment and funding to a Ukrainian war effort that is not up to the task. As Russians would say, it's inadequate.
How will NATO react when the world sees their tanks are not invincible?
The million-dollar question. Germany's made a lot of money selling Leopard 2 tanks. If you take a look at a map of NATO countries and around, Leopard 2 is in a lot of arsenals. And I'm here to tell you right now, the Leopard 2 will be a death trap on the battlefield. It's just not going to be what Germany thinks it's going to be or what the Ukrainians think it's going to be. It's going to die. That's going to be sort of humiliating for the Germans. The Challenger 2, I mean, it's a decent tank, but 14 of them, it's a company. And what happens when a company meets a battalion? They're all going to die. They're not supported by artillery. They're just going to be open. They're vulnerable to everything. A tank is a weapon. A tank works best as a part of a system. Combined arms support, artillery support, close air support, infantry to protect them. You bring then the Challenger 2 tank into this environment, it's going to die. It's just going to be yet another humiliation for NATO, just like the Patriot air defense system is going to turn out to be a humiliation for NATO. There's not enough of them. They're not that good. These aren't game-changing technologies. I mean, the Challenger's been around for a long time. So it's not like the Russians don't know about it. It's not like the Russians never said, well, what if the British sent a brigade and we had to fight a British brigade in the plains of Poland? What are we going to get to destroy the Challenger? And it's not like the Russian defense industry never said, hey, why don't we try this round? It's actually perfect for the Chobham armor on the Challenger. I bet you the Russians have anti-tank rounds designed to kill the Chobham tank armor. And I bet you when those 14 Chobham armored Challenger 2 vehicles show up on the battlefield, that the Russians will have the appropriate response for them, which will result in the Chobham armor being pierced like a hot knife or hot butter with a hot knife. There you go. Get the analogy straight before you speak it, and blow up. So it's just going to be bad for NATO all around. It's going to show NATO the reality of the fact that for the last 20 years, they've been singularly focused on fighting farmers and villagers in Afghanistan and Iraq. And they forgot, that there's a real army out there called Russians, and the Russians haven't. The Russians have been training and equipping to fight a NATO type army since at least 2008.
How could an accidental and or intentional nuclear exchange be kicked off? What would have to happen and or how would it happen?
Well, I believe, first of all, the initiator would be from the United States, not Russia. Russia isn't going to initiate a nuclear strike. I think the big thing would be a NATO intervention that prompted a serious Russian conventional response, one that did strike NATO countries. Because I think Russia has made it clear that if NATO intervenes in Ukraine, that all NATO becomes a target. And I think Russia would use conventional weapons to take out some very critical leadership nodes, decision-making nodes, et cetera, maybe including NATO headquarters, Ramstein Air Base, where they have a big, it's where they do a lot of coordination with the Ukrainians, and some Polish air bases and things where they receive logistics. And they do that in a manner that just humiliates NATO to the point that NATO feels, and the United States feels necessary to send a signal to escalate, to de-escalate. We keep accusing the Russians of having that theory, but it's purely 100% ours. And we fire off a limited nuclear strike to send a signal to the Russians, enough is enough. And the problem is Russia has said they won't be the first to use nuclear weapons, but they won't be the second, meaning they're not going to wait for that to hit. Prior to that hitting, they will launch an all-out retaliation and the world ends. So that's how I think a scenario like that unfolds.
Do you think even after Russia wins, will the West admit it caused the war and build Ukraine's economy, or will they stick to its lies like how the West always does?
I mean, this is it's an unknowable. I think the bottom line is that Europe, because I think what's going to happen after Russia wins, because I do believe Russia is going to win, that the West is going to become very fractured, and that we're going to have three schools develop. One will be the American school, which is, of course, we are the exceptional superpower. It's not our fault they lost. The Ukrainians can't fight. Europe sucks, all that, but it's not our fault.
Ignore that.
Europe. Pardon?
Sorry, ignore that. Go ahead.
Oh, then Europe is going to fracture at least into two schools of thought. One is we need to double down on NATO and get more American support in Europe, and the other one's going to be screw that. That didn't work. America set us up for failure, and we need to start promoting an exclusive European security framework where Europe looks out for Europe's best interests. And I think Russia's going to want to talk to the latter, to talk to the ones who look out for European interests and come up with a new European security framework that deals. The interesting thing is I think this division is going to be old Europe, the old NATO countries moving away from the United States, and the new Europe, the Baltic countries and Poland, maybe the Czech Republic, being the ones that want heavy commitment. And we might see something where the United States, either with or without NATO, doubles down in providing support for these new countries in some sort of treaty relationship. But I think we're going to see a divide, a fracture in Europe. And I think we're going to see the United States become increasingly isolated from Europe, because there's a lot of resentment right now, not just about the military quagmire. That'll become more evident when Russia wins, but the economy. You got the Germans and the French very mad at the United States about how they've caused them to divorce from Russian gas, but charge them, horrific prices for American liquid natural gas. And industries are shutting down, jobs are fleeing, and the Germans and the French are waking up to the fact that America's not their friend.
What is your take on 9/11, considering the past 20 years of war manufacturing? Do you believe the U.S. is complicit in the events? What hit the Pentagon? Why did 3 World Trade Center buildings fall? Why?
Well, here we go.
Why?
If I answer this question, we're going to lose 5,000 subscribers right now.
Good.
But I'm going to say the following.
Good.
9/11 happened because 19 bad guys hijacked 4 airplanes and did horrible things with them. End of story. Anybody who thinks that there was a U.S. conspiracy, I come back to what I talked about earlier. One, the United States government isn't clever enough to carry out a conspiracy of that scale and that complexity and execute it that properly. If you've worked in the U.S. government, you know that just never happens. The U.S. government is incompetent. The U.S. government executes things incompetently. And the other thing is, for that to happen, you would literally have to have thousands of men and women who are people like me, people of honor, who took an oath to uphold and defend their country, swore an oath to the Constitution, and then you expect them to violate that. That doesn't happen. You have a few handful of criminals, you have bad people up there, but the vast majority of the people in the U.S. government are good, honorable people doing a good, honorable job. who believe in the Constitution. You may not agree with the policies that they're implementing, but they believe that what they're doing is right, and they believe what they're doing is legal, and they would never execute an unlawful order. Straight up. So stop insulting these people by insinuating that somehow there's a goddamn conspiracy. There is no conspiracy. Literally no conspiracy. And then the other thing is, where's the whistleblowers? I mean, my God, this happened. All those people knew about it. Where's the person that wakes up one day after, drinking themselves nearly to death saying, I can't live with myself anymore. I'm sitting on this horrible secret. And they come out and they're going to talk about it. I mean, I know the conspiracy. They're dead already. They tried to speak and they were killed.
Nothing ever happened to anybody, by the way, right?
Well, who knows? I mean, maybe it's so clear. Again, if the U.S.
but I've seen all these 9/11 kooks aren't shy about spewing their theories, and nothing ever happens to them. So, I mean,
I'll put it this way.
And by the way, you know who else this is an insult to is New York City firefighters, because they were on the scene. So what are you saying? You're saying that they're either too stupid to see what's going on right in front of them, or they're afraid. Their relatives, their colleagues got killed, and you think they're going to be afraid to speak out? You think they're too stupid to know what happened?
Well, they show the video where you have the guys going, man, it's like explosions, pop, 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 pop. And they're going, see, that's a building being brought down. No, dude, that's a building imploding. As it comes down, each floor is being stressed and it's blowing out. Literally, as the floors come down, that's what you're hearing. I was at a friend's house that day, and we were lifting weights, doing manly things like men. And then 9/11 happened, so we started watching on TV. And I won't give his name, but if he's listening, he'll swear up and down this is truth. I looked at him and I said, that building's coming down. He said, what are you talking about? I said, right there, the structure's starting to fail. You could see the metal.
And there's transcripts and recordings of the firefighters talking on their radios throughout the day saying that they think it might fall.
Yeah, well, no, because it's structurally unsound. But the point is, a plane hit it, the fuel exploded, was concentrated, thing caught on fire, and the structural beams expanded, the building came down. It's just basic 101. But here's the other thing for all those people that suddenly became experts overnight and the dropping of buildings.
They watched videos and demolition experts say, hey, it looks like a controlled demolition. Well, maybe it does look like it.
Have you ever looked into what a controlled? First of all, the science of a controlled demolition is very precise, very precise. It's all timed perfectly based upon the physics of the structure. So, in order for this to be a controlled demolition, they would have had to set the explosives before the airplane hit. All right, now the explosives are done hardwired. You don't do a controlled demolition of a building of this size using radio control, because it could be jammed, it could be a signal miss. It's hardwired. Everything has to be done in sequence. So now you go up and you hardwire all the explosives, and then you fly an airplane in the building, and you think your carefully constructed plan is going to work. You guys who think that this was a controlled demolition, you're smoking dope, literally. Now, I know there's a bunch of architects out there saying, no, I've studied architecture my entire life. Well, you haven't studied enough. Go back and study it again.